mercy, look at how the time
3, 2, 1,
goes.
and welcome everybody to this episode of the Coming Home Podcast. I am your host, John Allen. And how you doing today? George Estes Blackburn. How you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks. You kind of broke up. You froze just a minute there.
Yeah, we're doing this on FaceTime. I wish you could be here in person, but here we are doing it on FaceTime, and there might be a little lag in the internet connection on my end.
Most likely my end.
Technology is a cool thing. This is really fascinating that we can do something like this. I'm still fascinated by these technological things, and it's pretty cool to be able to do these kind of things. But sometimes, with the delays, with the lag in the internet and stuff, it just nothing beats a face-to-face conversation.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. Now, here we are, two Americans in Norway. How did you get here?
I got here through ex-wife number one.
Okay.
Not to be confused with ex-wife number two or my current wife.
Oh, okay. 3 times.
3 times.
There you go. Third time's the charm.
Lucky.
3 times lucky.
Yeah.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with practice until you get it right.
That's right. Exactly.
So I tell people I met my wife, my little Norwegian wife, on a Friday night, and all of a sudden I woke up on Sunday and I was in Norway. I don't know how it happened.
Know the feeling.
You are from the state of Mississippi.
That is correct.
Yeah. Where in Mississippi are you from?
Jackson. Capital city.
Jackson, Mississippi. For about 18 months when I was finished with my active duty time in the U.S. Marines, I took a job as a truck driver. I was living in North Carolina at the time, and that job took me all over the United States, but I was very much in the southeast United States. Mm-hmm. And I was quite often in Mississippi. Now, I'll never forget, my mother, my sister, and my grandmother had come to visit me at my home in North Carolina. This was shortly after I had started truck driving. And my grandmother, who had never been inside a semi-truck before, so I lifted her up and put her in there. She's looking around, and she asked me, she says, "John, where are you going, baby? Where are you going on your next trip?" I says, "Well, I'm going through Mississippi." And she looked at me, this old woman from the hills of Kentucky, and her eyes got a little bit bigger, and she said, "Baby, be careful."
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh, Grandma, I'm fine. I've got my training. I know how to drive." She says, No, that's not what I'm talking about. Be careful.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of struck me. I guess that was something I had never really thought of before. She's coming from the old school days, with the Green Book, where blacks had to, kind of route themselves through different areas of the country, mm-hmm. depending on where they would get proper treatment. So she was in that old school way of thinking. And when she knew I was going to Mississippi, she told me to be careful.
Yeah.
Now this was in around 1994, 95. So you, as a Mississippian, George, and we're roughly the same age, you and I, in 1994, 1995, did my grandmother have good reason to tell me to be careful as I would be driving through Mississippi?
If you asked me in 1994, 95, I probably would have said no.
Yeah.
No. But now, and I'd still like to say no, but I'm not entirely sure that's the case. I heard one time, and I do not remember who the quote was attributed to, but there was a quote that's something like the northerner, or was it the northerner loves the race and hates the individual, whereas the southerner hates the race but loves the individual. And this is regarding black people.
Interesting.
And I can't speak for everybody. I can't speak for anybody coming from the North, because I have virtually never been there. and I think a lot of Southerners tend to, particularly those that were the domestic help, like to think of them as part of the family, and
right.
how much they really are, I don't know. But I mean, I'm a white guy, and I did not have to concern myself being out after dark or going to the wrong spot or anything else. But again, like I said, I think now you ask me, and I would probably say, yeah, there's probably reason to be concerned. But if you asked me in 94, 95, I probably would have said, no, your grandmother's misunderstood. She's blowing it way out of proportion. It's not like that.
She, well, let me ask you this. You mentioned about how, I think that was a very interesting thing you said. Hate the race, but love the individual. Love the race, and then the opposite.
Yeah.
The opposite.
Yeah.
Did you grow up with domestic help in your house?
We did for a time.
It was a black woman, I would assume.
Yes. Well, we had a few. First, we had Alberta, and she actually helped. She helped my grandparents. She worked for my grandparents.
What kind of work did she do?
Just domestic stuff, cleaning, cleaning, some cooking. Watching after my dad and his brother. And then later, we had at our house, Nice Mary and Mean Mary. And then in the end we had Josephine.
Okay.
And she's the one that I remember the most. And she was with us up until, gosh, I don't know for how long. I don't know when she started, but probably around 77, 78. She, if I remember right, I think my parents had to let her go just because they could not afford it.
Okay. Did she live in the home with y'all?
No, she did not live in our house. She had a car. She used to pick us up from school, but because both my parents worked.
Okay, yeah.
And she had a big, I don't remember what kind of car it was, but it was big and purple, and it was a convertible. And we used to call it the Batmobile. and so when she'd pick us up and drive us home, and it was just always a blast to ride in the Batmobile. But she also worked at the church, and I don't know if that's how we got sort of in touch with her to begin with, but she worked at the church we attended.
Okay. I'm just trying to get my head around that entire concept of having, I don't know. It seems almost like a, and forgive me if I don't want to sound like I'm trying to bash your family and their way of thinking back in those days, but there seems to be something very hypocritical about that whole thing of the domestic help being almost like they're a part of the family, and yet there were racist overtones and undertones throughout the entire situation, the entire arrangement. That fascinates me that exists.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, it's a,
but it's nothing you thought of at the time.
No, it was it was part of it. It was just, and I guess I never thought about it in a way because it was never detrimental to myself.
Right.
Or my family. I know that sounds, awfully selfish and egocentric, but, when you're a kid, you don't think about those sorts of things, I don't think.
And also, and not to justify it, but just to explain the normality of it, when that entire setup, with domestic help and how they were accepted and not accepted, how they were treated, whether it was considered good treatment or bad treatment, when it was the way it was throughout that entire area and throughout that entire state, throughout that entire region, when that was the normal, I can imagine, I can see how it would be difficult for you to see anything wrong with that, because there was nothing wrong with it according to the way that social demographic was set up at that time.
Yeah, I mean, it was, it was, I read somewhere about systemic racism is like, it's like the oxygen you breathe. When you are born, it's the oxygen you breathe in. Yeah. It is, it permeates the culture that much.
Yeah.
I really, and I hope that I'm right. I like to think that it's changed some since then in the South. Let's see, I last lived there. I first came to Norway in '96, and then moved back to the States in 2001, and then moved back to Norway again in 2006. So I had 5 years there, early 2000s.
Did you see a difference then?
Not really, but again, I was sort of in the same situation. I was living in a predominantly white neighborhood.
Uh-huh.
I worked at a private club, a tennis club. So that it was pretty much, it was an all white membership.
I'm laughing because as a stand-up comedian, I see so much material in that imagery of a tennis club in Mississippi.
Yeah, and we had most of the staff was black.
Yeah.
Yeah, office staff. Most of the office staff was white, and cleaning and cooks and waiters and all of that were black.
So how prevalent is it today, or how prevalent was it when you went back in the early 2000s? The whole concept with domestic help, with the woman in the home, clean and basically working as a servant.
I don't know. I really could not tell you because, we didn't have one. And I'm sure I knew somebody that did, but we didn't, it wasn't, a topic that was really discussed. And I don't think that was out of shame. It was just, you just never talked about it. But
right.
I've seen on social media where people are, celebrating events with and their help is in the picture and part of it,
because that concept seems so archaic. It seems so so far in the past, and yet it's not. It's pretty interesting. Just by chance, I didn't plan this, but by chance, I'm reading a book. This is the second time I've read this book. It's a book by John Grisham. It's called The Reckoning. And a big part of that book, it's based in Mississippi, a place called Crawford, Mississippi. I don't know whether it's fictional or real, but
I think it's his fictional place or one of.
Yeah. And in that book, a large part of the story is about the domestic help. And this was back in the middle 40s, like right after World War II. And, that's a couple generations ago. And yet here we are, both of us being the age that we are, around 50. And you lived that. It's fascinating to me. It's fascinating. It's not so old-fashioned as one would have it. It's quite modern, quite normal, fairly recently.
Yeah, I think probably about the only difference now is that, and again, how prevalent it is with domestic help, I don't know, but I think probably the main difference is, they're not wearing a uniform.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Back in those days, they had the classic maid.
Yes.
Yeah. So what happened then? What is it that made you change your thinking, or at least become more aware of the disparities between Black society and white society?
Just watching the news, really. I thought a lot of it had to do with moving here to Norway because
really?
it's
How so?
Yeah. Well, I think. So I think here, they've got the, it's a socialist society, and they do more for the common good. And I don't mean that Norway is not racist, because I think it is.
Yeah, it is.
And and again, I was reading, and I do not remember the name of the book, but I was reading a book about the war, World War II, and the aftermath, and that black soldiers who came back, who had fought for the country as just as much as any white man, were denied services and denied this and denied that, and I think, how fucked up is that? I mean, that's just to me just unacceptable.
It's really fascinating that was allowed. No exception for the black soldiers, regardless of the service that they laid down for the country. And I spoke about this on other episodes of my podcast. You want to talk about generational wealth gaps. Well, a lot of it can be traced back to black servicemen who didn't get their just due after World War II. They didn't get their interest-free housing. They didn't get their educational benefits, and that has a ripple effect that will last over generations.
Yeah. No, I absolutely, and I just, it's and I've also read a quote a few times that if Eisenhower fought the Germans the way he fought racism or civil rights, we'd be speaking German right now.
That's a good quote. I never thought about that, but that is quite true. That's quite true.
And that he was very, very soft on it, and just well,
it's the difference between a soldier coming back from service after World War II and falling right back into sharecropping, for example, or being able to have a easily affordable home and an education. Now, that right there is two totally different streams that family could have floated down. One is one of education, prosperity, and inclusion, and the other one is the exact opposite. You have the great quote by Martin Luther King about, and I'm paraphrasing here, about people telling the black man at that time to pull himself up by his bootstraps when he doesn't have any boots.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
well, and that's what, and I see that's what happens even today, and not just but to those in poverty.
Yes.
And it's black, white. At that point, it doesn't matter. But it's there you see it constantly. The people that I don't have any boots to pull myself up by. Well, I'm working 3 jobs and I still can't make ends meet.
Well, there's something that is dripping through our society, and I say dripping because it starts at the top. It starts with the White House, and it just drips down through society. This thing that has turned people into selfish, callous, non-caring people.
Yeah.
To me, America, the whole principles of the founding fathers was this thing of unity and a common cause. And I think I don't think we've seen that yet. It's written in the Constitution. It's written, all over the place from the early days of the United States, but I don't see it being put into practical operative terms. It hasn't happened yet.
No, it hasn't. And it's just it's a travesty. But it's been particularly hard on African Americans who were brought over against their will, forced into labor, where plantation owners and a lot of other people made a shit ton of money.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, they fought, and then they, started their own country to be able to keep doing that. Against the, started their own country, fought a war against the United States to be able to keep people enslaved.
Yeah, and look, the way I look at it, I think we just need to admit that that's what happened. We need to admit that. And then once we've admitted that, then we need to work on, I call it righting the wrong. We have to right the wrong. And to me, that means reparations. But I don't think reparations means a check in the hand of every black person. That's very superficial. I don't think it's going to have a lasting positive effect. To me, reparations means leveling the playing field. And that doesn't mean taking anything away from everyone. It just means leveling the playing field. I saw this morning. There was a law that was put into effect under President Obama that basically reinforced a Fair Housing Act that was put in place in 1968. And President Obama did something to reinforce that. I don't know the details, but basically it was a fair housing measure that would make it very, very difficult to engage in racial discrimination when it comes to housing. Well, the current administration has removed that.
Yeah, and I saw that.
Yeah, did you see that? And to me, that is a jaw dropping. People ask me, well, how does can you give me any example of how the president or how the Republican Party is racist? Well, there you go, right there. They have taken away. They have rolled back. They're rolling this back to the civil rights era. They're taking away advancement that has been made since the civil rights era, and they are making it easy. They're opening the door to racial discrimination when it comes to housing. So that falls right back into line with the generational wealth gap. If it's harder for black people and other racial minorities to get good and decent housing, it's going to be very difficult for them to advance themselves socially and economically. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So examples of racism in the current administration and from the president, there you go, right there.
Yeah. It's all, pick a day and pick a tweet. It's almost that prevalent, I think.
Yeah, it is.
And to be honest, as far as the current administration, even if they did a bang up job on everything else, the amount of misinformation and disinformation and the lack of communication and the poor communication, the misogyny, the personality, that cult of personality, I cannot accept.
Yeah,
it's just awful.
And it's beyond a Democrat or Republican thing. To me, it's an issue of morality. It's an issue of right or wrong.
Yeah.
I personally, I don't care if someone is a Democrat or a Republican. That's meaningless to me. And any, let's call it normal political differences that there are, well, I think that's okay. I love to have those discussions. But when you get into this blind acceptance of the current administration and specifically of this president, then I have to question. I guess the question is how much is okay? How much are people willing to accept in the forms of misogyny, racism, low moral content? How much of that are people willing to accept so that they get a bigger tax cut?
Yeah, you're right, and I think it seems like a surprisingly large amount of people.
Do you think he's going to continue after November 4th?
I really, really, really hope not. I think he will be the ruin of the country. Absolutely. I mean, he is so short-sighted, and right now he's just in there. He's the fox in the hen house. He is in there. He's trying to make as much money as he can before he gets either kicked out in November or, continues to loot the coffers for another 4 years.
Yeah.
I'm amazed that nobody foresaw that.
Yeah, it's not like he was hiding who he was.
No.
Good Lord.
Not at all.
Look at his look at how he has always been. He has never changed. He has always been the man that we see today.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling.
It is.
It's too early to boggle my mind.
No. Yeah. Exactly. But we were discussing, the race and the culture, and I called you the first time because I think this is important because of this picture that I had seen, and I'll show it to you. The listeners can't see it. This is my.
Yeah.
Let's see where is that one right there is my great grandfather.
Yeah.
And those are his brothers.
Now that is an old school picture. That is, yeah.
Yeah. They were in the 1st Mississippi Regiment, and they fought at. Oh gosh, they were all over the place.
You have to take a cell phone photo of that and send that to me, please, if you don't mind.
I will.
Yeah.
I will.
Yeah.
But the 2nd Mississippi, that flag was when the Confederacy capitulated. Nat Bynum, the standard bearer, tore the flag from its staff and hid it in his bosom, and bore it safely back to Dixie. Uh-huh. So you have, and this was my great grandfather that wrote this for the local newspaper, the Corinth Herald. Anyway, it was. Let's see. They fought at First Manassas, Sharpsburg, Gettysburg, Gaines Farm, Boonesboro, and Malvern Hill.
Yeah.
But and I bring this up because this is part of. For me, that was just a family heirloom.
Yeah. And
we also had his watch, his pocket watch, which he was shot through the neck and became shot through the neck at Powder Springs. Before he became unconscious, he placed what money he had and a solid gold watch in his hat. Camp followers stole the money and the watch, and then. Later on, and the doctor sent a message to the family that, come get him, he's going to die. And then he ended up recovering. So they sent a message to intercept the family, which they did. And he returned to take command of his troops and was shot through the thigh at Pickett's Charge in Gettysburg.
Injured again. Wow.
Yes. And then, 48 years after the Battle of Powder Springs, a Dr. Worsham and a friend, he was a friend and close friend, a comrade and close friend, it says, of Major Bynum, was fishing on Indian Creek in the Tennessee mountains. An old trapper came to his camp and was showing Dr. Worsham the old Keywinder watch. The doctor recognized it at once and paid the trapper $10 for the timepiece, bringing it back to Corinth, and gave it to the family again.
Wow. So there's
48 years later.
There's a story in that watch. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And so, and this stuff was just, these were family heirlooms. And I never thought anything of it. It was just it was part of the decorations. And, and you also grow up in the South, you grow up with the whole lost cause mentality and you've got all the, lately there've been the monuments been taken down and recently the Confederate flag taken off the state flag of Mississippi.
That's right. That was a shocker for me.
Me too.
That was a surprise.
And, and everybody, got in a tizzy about that. Well, that part didn't come on until 1894, I believe.
Yeah.
But and everybody's been banging on about, well, well, that's not what it was started out being. It started out, it was a benign symbol, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, well, the swastika was also a benign symbol.
Exactly. And
it's been a symbol going back thousands of years that has meant good luck. It was a marketing tool in the 1920s for Coca-Cola, even the Boy Scouts.
Yeah. And then, of course, it came on to be something else, and people acknowledge that it grew into something else, and it has that stigma. But for some reason, people resist that same logical thought process when it comes to the Confederate flag and all of its symbols.
I know, and that, I think that's what fascinates me, because I was reading this a brief history of Confederate flags, and in 1861, 6 southern states had a convention in Montgomery, Alabama, and many of the delegates wanted to just keep using the Stars and Stripes.
Uh-huh.
Or one that was very similar.
Uh-huh.
So the first flag they used was the what they called the Stars and Bars, which had a red bar at the top and at the bottom, and a white bar in the middle, and then in the Union corner, the 13 stars representing the 13 Confederate states on a blue field.
Yeah.
So it looked very similar to the Stars and Stripes, the U.S. flag. Well, in battle, it came about that in 1861, Beauregard, General P.G.T. Beauregard, directed his quartermaster to issue each soldier a piece of red flannel that they could have on their arm.
Okay.
To distinguish them, because these two flags, when they're walking along, if there's no wind,
they look awfully similar.
They look awfully similar.
Yeah, you may not catch that. Yeah.
And it happened that Confederate troops were coming from, this was at First Manassas, coming from the south, I think it was the south. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But they were coming from one side with Federal troops on the other side, and before they could identify the troops as friendly, some got shot.
Yeah.
So they ended up, after a long back and forth and this, that, they came up with what is the Confederate flag now, the also called the Beauregard battle flag.
Yeah.
And it's, and it was, so that's what it was. It was, I suppose, a benign symbol to begin with. Yeah. But it also represented, at the same time, it represented a country that was fighting to promote slavery. And part of the lost cause, though, is this whole states' rights deal. That no, it wasn't slavery; it was states' rights. Well,
isn't it the states? Wasn't it the states' rights to continue with, among other things, slavery?
Well, yeah,
they can't separate that fact.
No, and they don't. In the letter of secession,
it's there.
The Mississippi State Letter of Secession, our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world. Its labor supplies the product which constitutes by far the largest and most important portions of commerce of the earth.
And there you go. There it is.
Yeah. And listen, and it gets even better. These products are peculiar. They're not even people, they're products. These products are peculiar to the climate verging on the tropical regions, and by an imperious law of nature, none but the black race can bear exposure to the tropical sun. And that
is written in their letter of secession, is it not?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. That's it. That's the sort of the introduction, and then that we do not overstate the dangers to our institution. A reference to a few facts will sufficiently prove. It tramples the original equality of the South. There's several of these, but I've underlined just a few. It advocates Negro equality socially and politically, and promotes insurrection and incendiarism in our midst.
Well, there it is. I mean, it's written so plainly, and yet you have people who ignore the facts of that of that document that you're reading from.
Yeah. And this one surprised me the most because it's been used again now lately. It has enlisted its press, its pulpit, and its schools against us until the whole popular mind of the North is excited and inflamed with prejudice.
The North inflamed with prejudice. Okay.
Yes.
Wow.
And it seeks not to elevate or support the slave, but to destroy its present condition without providing a better.
Wow. So they're saying slavery is the best thing for black people. Why change it? You don't have anything better for these black people.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
It's
Amazing.
the best thing. It's the best thing they've got now. And unless you come up with something better, well, I don't know. Freedom is pretty good.
Hello. I wonder,
Maybe.
and I wonder how, and again, I wonder how people can circumvent those words. People who claim to be a diehard Southerner, loyal to those old ways, and yet they will hop over those facts because there's other states who had very similar wordage in their documents of secession. But people will just jump right over that and say that the Civil War or the cause of the Confederacy had nothing to do with slavery. Fascinating.
Yeah,
Fascinating.
It is. And then I'm fascinated with the hypocrisy of these people that claim to God-fearing, United States loving people, but they've got all of these statues that pay homage to fallen Confederate soldiers, all the Confederate generals. But would you do this? I mean, I think it's worthy of a comparison, with Nazi Germany.
Sure, it is.
I mean, would you put up statues of Hitler around the states?
And
he fought against America.
And the situation in Germany and how they've dealt with Nazism and World War II, it totally destroys the argument of supporters of the Confederacy who say those statues need to be up so that we can remember our history. Well, again, there's not a single statue of Hitler in Germany. The history is there because it's taught in schools, and there are museums where you can learn about that history.
Yeah.
So it's not necessary to have statues of Robert E. Lee on every street corner in every capital of in the South in order to know the history of the Civil War. That's what schooling is for, and that's what museums are for.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of learning in museums and libraries, and that flag that I showed you the picture of, that that is now in the state archives. And if I want to, I can call up the state archives and say that I want to see that flag, and they will bring it out, and I can go see it. Well, I have no need to go see it though. And I'm sorry, but I think that's part of the mentality is nobody wants to admit that their family made mistakes. This is my great grandfather. Never met him. His granddaughter was my grandmother, on my father's side, and she was a sweet lady, and I never heard her utter a single racist word or comment.
No.
And never saw any racist actions from her or my grandfather.
No.
But I don't know why he fought. To the best of my knowledge, he or any of our family has never owned slaves. So the only thing I can assume is that he fought because he felt their way of life was being threatened. And I think that's where you see, and it's sort of the same with the current administration is that they're this frenzy and making people scared for their way of life.
Yeah. I think that's quite reasonable to not everyone who fought under the Confederacy was a slave owning, black hating racist. Not everyone was. Some of them were, a lot of them were, most of them were, but some people, I would imagine, when they see these federal troops coming, marching towards their land that they've worked hard to build up, and they feel threatened, physically threatened. So they take up arms. I'm sure there were people who, as you say, just felt that their way of life was being threatened. Just like not every German soldier was a card-carrying Nazi. So we have to be reasonable in this thing, but I think it boils down to the need for people to recognize why that war was fought by the South. And when I say by the South, I don't mean each individual, but I mean the South as in the Confederacy, as in the organization of those states. It was fought to maintain a way of life which included and which was founded on slavery. The glue that held that all together was slavery and racism. And people need to acknowledge that. We need to acknowledge that, and then, as I say, move on and right the wrong and make things right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But what do you think about this phenomenon called white guilt? You kind of touched on it. You said nobody wants to admit that they or their family has done anything wrong. And then here comes the white guilt thing. Now, white guilt manifests itself in a few different ways. It can manifest itself very internally. It can be internalized to where you become a person who just won't admit, that racism is there. That you may have, benefited from your whiteness, or you may have said and done and felt racist things in the past. So you internalize that, and you'll never talk about it. You'll never admit it. You'll never address it. And then there's this other thing about white guilt where it becomes almost this syrupy, I don't know. You kind of see it sometimes in the protests where people, non-people of color, white people, will almost try to take over the protests and decide how the protests should be handled, because they get into this enthusiasm. Do you know what I'm saying? They want to make a difference. Yeah. They want, and then they kind of take. It's like you see a lot of people protesting today, and Black Lives Matter, or the issues with, people who have been killed by the police are not even discussed anymore. It's just a protest where white people are in the streets. So there's this white guilt thing. What are your thoughts about that? What are your thoughts about how white people should address issues of racism and maybe things that they've done? I don't know.
I think people. I think the best thing that white people can do is to engage in dialogue.
Be an ally.
You had a guest on earlier. Yeah, I heard a guest. You had a guest on your podcast earlier, and he said, my way of going about it is not going to go out to the streets of Oslo and protest, but when I come across friends or anybody else that I see, doing things in a racist way, call them out on it and engage them in conversation and dialogue. And that's sort of where I am. I'm not one to go out and protest.
No.
But, and I think that's where America has gone astray, and that is they've lost meaningful dialogue. It's just now it's kindergarten, shit slinging. That's all it is, name calling and everything else, and it's us against them, and I think it's on both sides, but I personally I think Republicans, so the right seems to be more prone to calling calling the left more names. But it happens on both sides.
Sure, it does.
Don't get me wrong. It does. Both sides are equally guilty, I think.
But I think the rightness or the correctness is in favor of those on the left. They may be going about it at times in a very ineffectual way, but they do want equality. They do want to level the playing field. Whereas on the right, you have people resisting that. And that's what I don't understand. I'll engage them in conversation if they're willing, but I cannot understand why they feel the need to discuss such things as racial inequality, such things as police brutality, such things as systemic racism. To not see that those are issues that need to be fixed blows my mind. Now, I will engage them in discussion, but I do not understand the need for that discussion. To me, the discussion on those things, we should be past that, and we should now be talking about how to fix it. But you still have so many on the right who don't even feel that those things need to be fixed. Look at how many people in the president's cabinet including the president, but also people in his cabinet who don't believe that there's such a thing as systemic racism. It's mind-boggling.
It is. It's like I've thought here recent that it's like being an alcoholic almost, and you're not going to get help until that you admit that there's a problem. Yeah. And I hear a lot of that also, that there's not going to be any change until there's a change in people's hearts. Well, maybe not, but until people start talking about it and admitting that there's a problem. And you're right. We're beyond the point of discussing whether or not there is a problem. There is a problem. Yeah. And we need to move on to discussing how to address that problem and how to fix it. But you've got the people that need the help need to admit that there's a problem.
It's very difficult to engage those people in a discussion. I've been accused of this so often. This whole thing about pulling the race card. Which I don't understand. I don't understand that way of thinking. If I bring up issues of racism and inequality, I'll be accused of pulling the race card, and then the other side stops all dialogue. Pulling the race card, okay. The card is in the deck. The card is in the deck, meaning it is an issue that should be discussed and dealt with. For some reason, a lot of people, as soon as that topic is brought up, they go into a position of defense. I'm not accusing you of anything when I bring up this subject. I'm just bringing up the subject for discussion and dialogue. But a lot of people feel it is an accusatory thing. They feel like it's something they need to defend themselves from. And then there comes that whole concept of pulling the race card.
Yeah.
Very frustrating. Very frustrating.
I would imagine. And unfortunately, that's not something that I have experience with. Because I'm white. I don't know if this is a funny story or not, but when in 1990, it must have been 1997, summer of 97, my first daughter was born, and me and my then wife were strolling through the town square here in Santa Fjord. And I'm white. I have black hair, and at that point, back then I was a lot of time outdoors, and so I might have been slightly tan. And this guy comes up, and this was before I could really speak Norwegian, right? So this guy comes up, and he had a good buzz on, and he was an older guy, and he's on this bike, and he comes over, and he says, and I had to ask my wife after this, but he says something in Norwegian, but it was, "Did you have this baby with him?"
Oh boy!
And she said, and I don't understand. I'm smiling like a big dope because I'm thinking he's, oh, what a cute baby, right? And he says, "Did you have this baby with him?" And she said, my wife says, "No, I had her by myself. What do you think? Of course." And then he starts biking off, and he screams, "No mixed races in Norway."
Wow.
What did he say? Because that did not sound like what a cute little baby. And she's like, she told me, and I'm like, motherfucker.
Yeah.
And now I think about it, and I don't,
Was that the first time you ever experienced racism?
Yeah.
So this guy probably thought you were. I guess I could see that with dark hair and a dark tan because in Norway, especially back then.
Yeah.
Everybody, you knew a Norwegian and you knew when they weren't a Norwegian, and if you had a good tan, I could see where people could maybe think Middle Eastern or
I could have been, yeah.
Wow.
I was definitely foreign.
So was that maybe a contributing factor to you changing your awareness when it comes to all things race?
Probably so. Probably so.
You felt it yourself.
Yeah, it was like, I just fuck you. I wanted to go chase him down and beat his ass. But that was not really an option.
I had a similar situation. Can't remember where I was going to or coming from, but I was on a train coming. For some reason, I was in Oslo with my son, me and Snoopy's second child, and he was maybe 2 or 3 months old at that time, and both of our kids are very light skinned. So he's very light skinned, and to me, it's obvious that he was half black and half Norwegian, but I guess I can see, because I guess Norwegians, when they're thinking of a black guy with a white Norwegian woman, they're thinking of an African, right? And as I like to say, I'm watered down. Our family is mixed with Irish and Native American and this, that, and the other. So I'm a watered down version. I have no idea when the last drop of African blood was put into my family.
Right.
So I guess Norwegians are used to seeing mixed race kids that are obviously mixed race. But at that time, my son was very young and he had no hair. So maybe if he would have had dark hair, they would figure, okay, this was a mixed race baby. Mm-hmm. So I'm sitting on this bus that to a person who's not used to mixed race babies would think that he was just a white Norwegian baby. And this lady looked at me and said, what? She actually said this. She said, what are you doing? And this was in Norwegian. She says, what are you doing with that baby? And I'm like, excuse me? She says, what are you doing with that baby? It's not normal for men to be babysitters or to be nannies. I'm like, I'm not a babysitter. I'm not a nanny. This is my son. Another lady who heard this conversation going on was sitting across the aisle in one seat behind me. She says to me, she says, don't worry, people won't be confused when your son gets older and he darkens up a little bit. So here I'm being bombarded by two threads of stupidity and ignorance. But it was and I couldn't get angry. I had to chuckle at the ignorance.
Yeah.
But it's and I can't even call that racism. I have to call that it was just ignorant.
It sounds like the second one was very well meant.
It was very well meant, but the ignorance of it all. She said, don't worry. First of all, as if I was worried about how my son looked. She says, don't worry. People won't be so confused when he gets older and darkens up a little bit.
Darkens up a little bit, yeah.
Oh my goodness, these poor Norwegians. So there's definitely racial issues. There's definitely racism here, but my God, is it different? It's different here. And I think a lot of it is based on not a really well thought out racist ideology. I think it's based on ignorance. It's based on Norwegians being very isolated in their way of thinking. I guess a racist back home, they've got generations of ideology behind them. They have a concept. They have ideology. They've got literature where they can talk about their racism and why black people are this, that, or the other, or why the white race is superior and so on and so forth. But it seems like Norwegians, it's almost like they're piggybacking on American racism, but they don't really understand it. They haven't really thought it through.
No, they haven't, and it's like I get so irritated when I see these Norwegians with the Confederate flag on, in their cars or whatever. I'm like,
and they're out there.
Dumbass,
For my non-Norwegian listeners, you would be surprised how often we see the Confederate flag here.
It is prevalent. In fact, it's on. Isn't it the logo of that television show?
Yes,
Norwegian Rednecks.
Norwegian Rednecks. Yeah.
Yeah. God, that show is just an embarrassment.
It is, and I know I've seen newspaper articles where Americans living in Norway have actually contacted that production and told them what that flag stood for, what it stands for today, and how it affects people who know the history of that flag, and they just brush it aside and say, "Well, we can't abide by American morality, or we can't, we don't take that into consideration." And it's like the insensitive. I call it social arrogance. Social arrogance. They have this arrogance about them that says, "Well, we didn't mean it this, that, or the other way, so we're just going to continue."
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of the, and this is my personal opinion, I think that's where a lot of the sort of the Norwegian racism stems from is an arrogance.
Yes. Yeah.
And you see it all the time in the Facebook group with the Americans. People have such a hard time getting their education approved.
Yeah.
For their American education, and I'm not saying that American education is the best in the world, but I think it certainly it has to be on par with the Norwegian education, and I think Norwegians they tend to overrate their own education and underrate all others.
Yes, they do. And I have personal experience with that. It hasn't been an issue. It hasn't affected me in a negative way other than to hurt my feelings. But all of my background, my education, my police academy and further education and whatnot as a police officer means nothing over here. Nothing. And the job I was doing would be a job that someone in Kripos, someone at the basically the Norwegian FBI would be doing, and yet it means nothing over here. And it's like, wow, what does a guy have to do to show that he's got some smarts?
Yeah, I know. I trained as a cook. And then later got a bachelor's in vocational education. I finished last year.
Yeah.
And I did not have a problem getting my cook's certification approved here and put on par with the Norwegian. So I've got sort of my fagbrev.
Yeah.
But
trade school basically for those who
trade school, yeah. And I've had to present that, along with all of my certifications, and the letter from the county administration that we have seen this and we have approved it, and it is as valuable as the Norwegian.
It's a long, hard process. Some education from back home can be accepted here, but very little. And if it gets accepted here, I've seen it. I've seen people struggling with that. I've seen people never get a foothold here in Norway, and you see it as well in the Facebook group with Americans in Norway. There's a lot of us that are struggling, and my heart goes out to them. It is not an easy transformation if you can't get that foothold when it comes to education or in lieu of that, some sort of job where you can sustain yourself. I've been fortunate, extremely fortunate. I am blessed to have gotten as far and been as successful as I have been here, but I see the struggle. There's a lot of us that aren't making it.
Well, I had the, I was a cook. So that is a job that, at that point, everybody, it was a desired position. Cooks were needed. Yeah. And then it got to where my body could not take, the 12-hour days anymore.
12 hours on your feet, man. That's rough. Well, that was, here was actually just a great thing because it wasn't 12 hours here. It was, it was 7.5 hours. Yeah. Or 8 hours, minus your 30-minute break. But, in the States, it was, 12 was a short day. It was up to 14, 16 hours sometimes. And thank God for the good labor laws over here in Norway.
Yeah. But that's when I started looking into other things and just fell into special needs. One of the mothers in my son's kindergarten, she knew somebody that worked at a junior high that had special needs. Okay. She said, I know that they're always looking for help. Yeah. Can I, you want me to call? Yeah. Why not? And, I've been pretty much doing that ever since.
Wow, man, what a fulfilling job.
It's great. I've loved it, and I'd love to continue, but I don't have the special educators stuff. Yeah. But I've been able to sort of con my way into
good old American ingenuity.
Yeah, well, it's a lot of the because the vocational stuff is very practical. Yes, and a lot of the special needs need practical sort of stuff. Yeah. So they go really well together. And so it's been great. But now I've finally landed, at least for a year, a job as a teacher, which is, but again, I've got the Norwegian education, so they can't get me on that.
Yeah, they can't get you on that.
But it's been a tough process. I don't know how many applications I've sent out, because now they do it for schools. They have sort of a one mass application. You send it. It's a general submission. Okay. And we need teachers. Okay. Yeah. Send your application in and what subjects you can and all of that, and then I don't know how many cities. I don't know how many jobs were available, but I've sent it out to 5-6 different cities. Wow. Nothing. Wow. Nothing. And I even though I've got the Norwegian education, and it may be because it's vocational, and I've got I could do either at the high school level, I could do trade school teaching, or down to junior high I could do the food and health. Yeah, and then I've also got history that I could teach. I see. And that may be just a bit too narrow for a lot, but I've thrown in there English. It's okay. I don't have the formal points on it, because they do the 60 study points to be able to teach. Yeah, I don't have that on paper, but I'm pretty fluent in English, and you
got a weird accent though. You got a weird
yeah. Yeah. But I'm sure I could, I need to brush up on the grammar, I'm sure.
Well, the thing is if they open their minds a little bit and look at your unique position, you are an American, you do speak English as your own language, you have that culinary background, and you have a different experience that can be attractive for students, especially at that level of junior high school.
Yeah.
Like from eighth grade all the way through. They have a little bit different school system here, as you and I know. But 8th to 12th grade, we can say that is something that can be very attractive. It can open the doors for a different kind of connection to the students than what.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You're so right, and I've also tried to sell myself in that way that I've got a different viewpoint, and that could be very valuable,
absolutely,
to the students. And and everywhere I've gone, I've just I get, not to brag, but I've gotten rave reviews, and and I'm getting called back again and again and again.
Man, that's great. I tell you, it's my first job. I got headhunted. Actually, they found me and asked me to run an after-school project from the eighth to 10th grade, a junior high school, basically, to run an after-school program for those students. And this was just a couple of months after we had moved here, way back in 2002. And that was based on I guess they thought progressively. They thought a little bit different. They were looking at my background as a police officer in the States and wanted to apply that knowledge and that background in a school setting, So I started running that project. And then very shortly after that, I also got offered a teaching job at that school. So that was my first job as a teacher. I taught English, of course, and music.
Yeah.
And I ran the after school program, and it was some of the best times, the most fulfilling times that I've had in all my years here in Norway. I can't describe the relief I felt when I got that job, because I had an enormous amount of anxiety, because I was pulled out of my comfortable environment as a police officer and transplanted here to Norway with nothing, no connections, no Norwegian approved education, nothing. And I had no clue what I was going to do. Mm-hmm. And by the grace of God, it just fell into my lap, that position right there. And boy, did I enjoy it. I got that job before I could speak Norwegian.
That's quite a feat.
Yeah, I got that job before I could speak Norwegian.
I suppose that goes. That's
talk about thinking different.
High praise. Yeah.
Well,
high praise.
Well, I'm fortunate that they were so progressive in their thinking. Mm-hmm. So, wow, what a start. And again, I count my blessings. I consider myself extremely fortunate to have had that kind of a professional beginning in Norway. And it breaks my heart to see other Americans struggling, mostly because Norway will not accept that American education. There's something wrong there. There's something wrong. I think Norway is missing out on a lot of talent among these Americans who are here, and I'm sure other nations as well. But it's just
absolutely, absolutely they are. I think they are. They're missing the boat in a lot of ways.
So yeah, you definitely have something different to offer as a teacher, and I loved working with that age group.
I have had such a good time the last. Almost 8 years now, doing all this, and it's been terribly rewarding. But I was like, I've also had so much anxiety because I've been on a call list. Yeah. And then I've gotten, the first job I had in the special needs, and that was, as a call-in, but, I worked just about every single day.
Okay.
The need is that great.
I see.
And then I've gotten, a substitute for, a couple of months or for a semester or for, the whole school year. So particularly the last 6 years have been, shorter and longer engagements.
What's the longest you've gone without being in an engagement?
Well, it was voluntary, but it was a semester, the spring semester of 2019, because I had to do my bachelor's, or what, I don't know what you'd call it, senior thesis, I guess. But I had a research paper that I had to get done, so I worked a lot in the fall to have to save up a little bit of money so that I could take it a little bit easy, so I could not have to work. And as soon as I delivered my paper, I called up and I was back to work. Not as often, but it was call in, and that's the way it was.
I can imagine there's a lot of anxiety with that. I mean, you have a job, you have a contract for a short period of time, but then that anxiety of, okay, well, what's going to happen when this engagement is over?
Yeah, and it's been that way. I'm glad that my wife earns well, so it has not been. It's not been that much of a burden, but it's still we could not live. We would be very meager on just her salary.
Thank goodness for these Norwegian women with good inheritances.
Well, I've got one with a good education.
Education and inheritance, even better.
Yeah.
Marry up, not down.
Yeah. Well, and I think one reason why we go so well together is she's half English. So my father-in-law is English, and so she grew up with seeing her dad in these struggles. Okay, she understands, and she understands, and she has always been supportive, and when I finally got this, right now I've got it's an engagement for a year. Which takes a lot of the pressure off, but
sure.
She said, congratulations, you've been really patient. You've worked hard for this, and that's not something I would have had maybe in other marriages, or my last two.
Hey man, practice makes perfect.
That's right.
No, I tell you that solid relationship, that solid marriage means so much. Again, I know, especially some American women, there's a handful of them who came here with nothing, and that includes coming here with no solid relationship. The marriage fell apart relatively quickly, and then all of a sudden they're faced with a pretty hard. Now, there's a great social system here. Nobody's going to starve in Norway, no. But to be a fresh immigrant with a freshly ruined marriage, and you're on your own, and you may have cut all your ties back home. What are you going to go back to? You don't have a job back in the States because you left.
Yeah.
And some of them with relatively young children, wow, there's some of them are struggling. I see.
Yeah, I know, and
aren't we lucky? We are fortunate who have the good marriage, the understanding spouse. I tease my wife like crazy. I test her patience daily as much as I tease her. But she's a rock, man. She's solid, and that's a big part of my success and happiness here, is having that solid marriage, someone I can lean on.
Absolutely. Because I don't have a friend network here, and I've lived. I feel like I'm in a lot of ways I'm a man with no country, because I've been away from there for so long that I don't really. I don't have any. I have like 2 or 3 friends over there that I keep up with in any sort of meaningful way, not just Facebook.
Yeah.
And then here I don't really have. I've had friends, some that I've worked with, but then if I've changed jobs, then, they're not there. And I'm stubborn enough, and possibly to a fault that, well, if nobody's going to call me, well, screw it, I'm not going to call them either. and that's a piss poor way of thinking, but it's kind of it happens. And I'm also an introvert, so I don't, I've a lot of times I like to be on my own, but a lot of times also, I'd love to sit and watch a ball game with somebody, and drink some beer and cook some ribs or whatever. I miss that. Fall is the worst time of the year for me.
Really, you think so?
Yeah, because of football.
Ah, I see. Yeah.
But it's particularly college football.
Gosh, I miss college football. Oh,
yeah,
man, I miss that.
And that's when I go, sort of into my winter I can handle because there's outside activities and it's great.
Yeah.
I don't love winter because I hate shoveling snow. We bought a snow thrower, which has been the best investment ever.
It's a life
without
changer.
a doubt.
It's a life changer.
It is.
Absolutely.
It is.
Do you ever find yourself wanting to go back? Move back?
No. This is where my family is. This is where my life is. I have no need to go back, not to move back anyway. I've come. I like it here. I'm doing well now. There's been times where I've wanted to just, say fuck it and
pack it in
and head off. But
I've wanted to do that at times too. But you know what has kept me from doing it? The hassle of having to start from scratch back home. That has been a big deterrent during times where both I and my wife wanted to move back. Now, I have no desire to want to move back now. I'm terribly homesick. I always am. But I have no desire to move back now. But up through the years, I have wanted to. But that task of reestablishing myself has kept me from doing it.
I don't blame you. I don't blame you a bit because I don't. Yeah, I've worked too hard to. I'm sort of just now getting a foot in the door.
Yep.
And I do not want to move back to have to start all over again.
You've invested everything you've invested, and to throw it all away would be, it's too big of a task. Too big of a task.
Yeah, it's too much to ask of me anyway. And it's such a hassle to move. God, I mean, I don't want to do it. It's a hassle just to move house. I don't want to have to move countries either.
We have moved so many times here in Norway. Man, I bet you we've moved 6 or 7 times. Now, where we are is where we will stay. We're done with that. It's too much. It's like taking your entire life, putting it in a plastic bag, filling it halfway with mud, halfway with water, and shaking it up. And then when you get to the new place, you've got to dump that bag and resort your life.
Exactly. Yeah.
I can't do it again. Can't do it
No,
anymore.
me neither. We debated for a while whether or not to move. It was either move or build on to the existing house. It's my wife's house. I moved in with her. And when we started having a family, then it was, okay, we either need to move or we need to add on.
Yeah.
And we went for adding on because we're the location of this house is really nice. It's quiet. We're at the end of a dead end.
Nice.
And it couldn't be better.
Nice.
And and my wife said if we're going to move, it's going to be for dream house right by the water. That's the only way she's going to be moving. And as you know, and like everywhere else, anything right by the water is more than we can afford. So So we're here and we like it.
Well, we have, we're down here in the city, but we have our other home way up north, and that one is right by the sea. I have to have that ocean thing. Now, I'm a rural guy from Ohio, so I don't know anything about the ocean from my upbringing, but since then, being in the Marines and overseas, and then the places we lived here in Norway, I am totally smitten by the sea. So having our place up north, up in Finnmark, which is, we have the ocean for our front yard.
Right.
That's important to me. Got to have that.
Okay.
And as you say, because of the pricing here in Norway, I think housing in Norway in general is expensive. But if you're going to get something by the ocean, man, you again, as I said earlier, that thing about marrying up. Now my wife that's where her father grew up.
Yeah,
so that's in her family, and otherwise, there's no way in the world we would be able to afford something like that.
No, well, we are in. I live in Sandefjord, which is a seaside town. We live, sort of up away from the ocean. But my mother-in-law and her sister have a cabin, 20 minutes from here.
Okay,
still in Sandefjord, and it's not right. It's 2 minutes to walk to the beach.
Nice. Nice.
And I, when I was first together with my wife, I never saw the point. What's the point of having a place so close to home? But man, is it nice!
I tell you, it's a different world when you have that beachfront. Now, do you have a nice beach there, or is it rocky?
It's a very nice beach.
Good,
it is.
good.
It's sand. Of course there are some rocks, but it's sand. As far as I'm concerned, it's the nicest beach in town.
Nice.
By far side.
It's so nice to have a place like that to escape to. That's
and we could, it's got facilities. We've got a bathroom there. We've got a kitchen. You can sleep there. We don't because it's it's not terribly comfortable. It's the bed. That's the foam mattress, and they are not comfortable. So we tend not to spend the night there. But it's nice to be out there, and if it starts raining, screw it, we'll just pack up and go home.
You know what we ought to do? They have I don't know what cable package you have for TV, but I have what's it called? Is it called Via Sport?
Yeah.
And during the NFL season, they'll play NFL games. Now they're always like 2 or 3 days after the game has been played.
Right.
But you need to get up here at some point this fall. Now, who knows what the NFL season is going to be like, but man, you just need to get on up here and we can catch a game. And
would love to do it because I know I do. I have a subscription for ESPN Player, and that's where I watch all my college games.
I should do that. I've been too cheap to do it, but like I said, I miss college ball. But I should just get that ESPN Player.
It's not that expensive. It's
what do you pay?
You can debate whether. Oh, you know what? I don't remember. I pay it once a year, and I think it's about. Is it 20? It's 20 pounds. Okay. It goes through England, so it's what about 200 kroner?
Yeah, that's nothing for
or so
year.
I'm pretty sure that's it.
That's nothing.
But you can debate. It's stable. It's not stable. It's sometimes it hasn't been worth it, but for the most part, it has been.
Well, that's what I've always heard about it is that sometimes you can get kicked out of it because of it's unstable and people get frustrated. You can't really have continuity when you're watching a game.
Not all the time, but I've had more good experiences than I have bad experiences.
Okay.
And plus, then you can watch college baseball, basketball. I've got the college pass, so But what irritates me more than anything else is what they show. They've instead of having like for instance, instead of having good baseball games, they've got lacrosse.
Yeah.
or you know. And I understand there are lacrosse fans. I don't know much about lacrosse. It looks like a kind of cool game, but you know, I would imagine there's more baseball fans in America, or you know, even in Europe than there are lacrosse fans.
Yeah.
So it's.
I would be getting it just for the college football thing. I miss watching a good college football game, and to me, college football is twice the entertainment that professional football is. Yeah.
Oh, I like it because people are so much more, seem to be so much more invested in it.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, they have more of a belonging to the school or whatever, and also like that it changes a little more often. You know that players. You know, you've got players for 3 to 5 years, and that's it. Then they move on. Yeah, and then there's a lot more coaching changes and all of that. So
who's your team?
I got to go with Ole Miss.
You got to go with Ole Miss.
Yeah.
I can't fault you there. That's some exciting football.
Yeah, and we've just after the peeing in the end zone deal, we fired the coach and we brought in Lane Kiffin, so everybody is geared up.
Tell people about the peeing in the end zone thing.
Oh yeah, I can't remember who the player was, but in the last game of the season, we were playing Mississippi State and. We scored a touchdown, and I think we could have tied the game with the extra point. Anyway, the player decides he's going to act like it because Mississippi State is the Bulldogs.
Yeah.
And so the player got down on all fours and lifted a leg and acted like he was peeing like a dog. And they threw a flag, and so the little extra point turned into a field goal, which was missed, and we lost. But had that not happened, we would have been stuck in mediocrity with our coach, who Matt Luke, who is a fantastic guy. I mean, nobody hates Matt Luke. He's a great guy. He was an Ole Miss guy, went to school there, all of that. Real stand up. Everybody likes him, but just not sure he's head coach material.
But why use that as an excuse to fire him? I never understood that. It was the player who did the symbolic pissing in the end zone. It wasn't the coach.
No, but I think it was a combination of things, and that.
But didn't they officially say that was the reason though?
I think that was sort of the tip of the that was the straw that broke the camel's back in a way. I think that many had been calling for his termination for a while, and then they sort of that was sort of an excuse as a lack of control or whatever you want to call it, and.
Hold on a second, George.
Yeah, no worries.
Are you... Cappuccino later? Italian ice cream? No. She don't let me have any fun. Did you hear her? That was a very, very definite no, she says. Go on with yourself then. That was Snoopy, everybody. I've been trying to make a date with her. There's this place down the road. I cannot remember the name of it. Otherwise, I would plug them. I cannot remember the name, but it's they have real, authentic Italian ice cream and the best coffee mocha you can find in the city. And nice. I've been trying to make a date with her to go there, but I call it Snoop stuff. Snoopy has Snoop stuff to do. She ain't got time for it.
Me and my son, a couple of years ago, I was in Rome with my son. We did a father-son trip, and we went and got some gelato. And after we figured out how you
that's
do
what it's called. Yeah, gelato.
Yeah, after we figured out how, because you have to pay first, and then you pay by size, and then you could just go pick. Good Lord, what an experience. Yeah. I mean, we tried. We always got 3 scoops, and we always got different flavors every time. And the number of flavors and the actual the taste was so much better. I mean, strawberry gelato
there's nothing
is
like it, man.
a whole lot different than the Norwegian strawberry ice cream.
And Norwegian ice cream is great. I think Norwegian ice cream is better than American ice cream, but this gelato, and this place I'm talking about is authentic. It's run by a family from Italy.
Yeah.
I mean, they're in there speaking Italian. They've got Italian radio going on in the background through digital radio and stuff. So it's the real deal. And man, I bet you they've got like 15 different flavors of ice cream.
Yeah.
They've got flavors of chocolate and vanilla and strawberry that I've never. It's not just chocolate; it's chocolate something or another. Flavors that I've never even heard of before. I love it. So shame on Snoopy for not wanting to. Well. One of us will keep the love flowing in this marriage. One of us will.
Yeah.
Wow, man! I tell you, I've really looked forward to this conversation. You are probably, I don't want to say you're the first, but you are one of the few American Southerners who have that viewpoint that you have. When it comes to dialogue, when it comes to acknowledging the past, and wanting to do something to better the future when it comes to race relations.
Yeah,
you're in a unique position. You really are.
Okay. Well, when all of particularly after the George Floyd murder, and I was, because that picture that I showed you, and I'll send you one. I'll take a picture of it and send it to you. But that hung at the bottom of our stairs.
Yeah.
And as I told you, it was more of a family heirloom, and I never thought much about the meaning of it. And then I kept walking by it, and it kept drawing my eye. Yeah. And that's why I said it's I'm not going to throw it away.
Because it's a part of your history.
It's part of my history.
Absolutely.
And I would disagree that a lot of people, it's our heritage. It's part of my history, but it's not part of my heritage. It's
and there is a distinction. There is a distinction.
And I'll accept the fact that it happened. And I'll do what I can to teach future generations. I teach my kids that, it's not right. We treat everybody the same. And, and I'm not one of those people who do, I see color.
Yes.
But I'm not going to treat you any different.
I've said that before on my podcast. For those who claim that they don't see color, I think that's foolish. I say there's nothing wrong with you seeing my color, just don't treat me any different because of it. So you and I, we rhyme right there. That's
And it's I know we segued off into a whole. We started out on racism and all of that.
Italian ice cream and ungrateful wives and.
Yeah, it's a tough question. It really is. And there's no easy answer, but I think the best way forward is through dialogue, open and honest dialogue, and not just because I tend to think of the current administration as like a little kid who's just gone in and just shit all over the place.
Yep.
And is going to head out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And continues to just throw shit on the walls and at everybody else. And it's awful. And I can't, and that is not dialogue.
It's not.
And Congress, as much as anybody else, they need some term limits, and they need to get a backbone and stand up for what's right.
Yeah.
And I can disagree with Democrats on how things should be. Policy, and I'll disagree with anybody on policy. But just because we have a disagreement does not mean that we can't work together to solve this. But it's just the gap to me just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and nobody is doing anything.
I just hope there's some significant change come November 4th. We need it. We need that significant change. And I believe now, Joe Biden is not my first choice for a Democratic candidate, but he is the one who's there, and I accept that. I believe, with all of his flaws, I do believe that once he becomes president, he will do or attempt to do significant things to change the situation in America. I have faith in that.
I do too, and I also think he's smart enough to listen to people that are, have the expertise in different fields.
Well, there's the bell ringer right there. I don't think he's going to be afraid to bring in experts, whereas this man that's there now doesn't want to listen to anyone. No. And there's the difference. There's all the difference in the world right there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What a great conversation.
That was. I'm glad I called you to begin with, and I'm glad we got to have a discussion on race, and like I said, it's my experience, and I don't speak for every Southerner, but I think it's safe to assume that a lot of Southerners have had the same, or at least white male Southerners have had the same experience as I have. Maybe not some of the female Southerners, or particularly people of color that grew up in the South, and that's that's one thing that has always, or that's one thing that has gotten to be important to me, is trying to understand that viewpoint. Because I never, except for the one time in '97 I told you about when in Norway, I've never experienced prejudice.
Right.
And I went to public schools up until 6th grade, and then I went to a private school. There were no black kids at the private school. Public school, that a lot of my best friends were black. Admittedly, none of them ever spent the night with me.
But how was that addressed? Because it's a normal thing for friends at that age to spend the night with each other. Was it ever addressed in any way, or was it just something that was never brought up?
It was never really brought up. I never, I had a couple of friends from kindergarten, and those were the ones that, the kids that spent the night with me were also white.
Yeah.
But they also lived very close to me.
Okay.
A lot of the black kids that went to my school were bussed in.
Okay, because that was my next question. How segregated was your school? But you say now they were bussed in, so they weren't from your neighborhood, but they were bussed in. Okay.
Yeah, they were bussed in. So there was a it was not a black kids bus per se, but it went to this area where all the black kids lived, and then I took a bus, that was full of white kids because that was in our neighborhood. And I was actually supposed to go to another school, but we used my grandparents' address because that public school was a better one than the one I was supposed to go to.
Okay, yeah.
So, so I had, at that age, I did, politics didn't interest me at all, and I had my friends. We played at school. Black and white, all and then after school, the black kids went home and the white kids went home.
Interesting. See, I never, of course, I had no clue about politics and all that stuff, and I had no clue about racism until, and I talked about this before on my podcast a couple episodes back. We moved from the city out to the country in that summer between 2nd and 3rd grade. So I was 7 years old, roughly, when we moved out to the country. And then the first day of school, I was confronted by a group of boys who, they threw the N-word around and they made it obvious that they didn't want. And then that was my first experience with racism that I can remember. That was the first time that racism became an issue. And that's when I was 7 years old. So that kind of I don't want to say it set the tone, because I'm not going to say that my entire, all of my years of school were filled with racism, but it kind of opened my eyes to the fact that there was something called racism, and here's what it is. Here's how it manifests itself.
Well, in your experience, was racism more prevalent in rural areas or in urban areas?
That's a hard question for me to answer. At that time, I only had the reference point that I had, as a kid living in a rural area. In fact, the episode that's coming up, no, I don't want to say too much about that. Anyway,
okay.
But it's something that I address in previous episodes and that I'm going to address in upcoming episodes. And it's the fact that I had that reference point as a black kid in an all-white area. Mm-hmm. And, some of the kids, how kids are. There's a new kid that comes and they're just going to pick on that kid because he's new.
Right.
But then there were certain things that these kids said at that age as a 7 and 8 year old, and they were saying things that they only could have heard from their parents.
Right. Yeah.
So was I in a racist environment? Well, the honest answer is yes. Yes, I was. But to compare it to other areas, whether, another city or another rural area, that's hard to do, because I think that will vary greatly depending on where you are in the country.
Yeah. Oh.
I don't know. I do think that the segregation that we see in the big cities today is indicative of the current state of racism. Look how segregated Chicago is. Why is it that in our biggest cities you have white neighborhoods and you have black neighborhoods and then you have Hispanic neighborhoods? Why is that? There's something that is fomenting segregation. Is it willful of these people to live only in a black area or only in a Hispanic area? Are they doing that willfully, or is it something in society that's causing that to happen? I think it's something in society that is causing that to happen. So
I think it is too. Yeah.
So in that sense, maybe racism, systemic racism, is more prevalent in cities than it is in rural areas. But then again, how many non-white people are living in rural areas? I can tell you from my time growing up in a rural area, there were almost none. So how will racism manifest itself in those rural areas? Maybe it won't manifest itself at all. I don't know. Yeah. No, it's a difficult issue.
It is, but I think, the subject of housing, I think that's almost, in a lot of ways, it's been engineered by those in power. Through gerrymandering and whatnot. And, I know in my home state there are a lot of blacks living in rural areas, particularly in the Mississippi Delta, then they would be, descendants of slaves.
Yeah.
Which is where, the Mississippi Delta is where most of the cotton was and still is grown. Mm-hmm. And it's I don't, and I used to duck hunt up in the Delta with friends and deer hunt up there. But we would normally just go to the hunting camp and hunt, and then, we'd head back to Jackson.
Yeah.
But you still see, there's, West Jackson, is mostly black. Northeast is white, and then South Jackson is a mix, I guess. At least it was in my time. I don't know how, but you'd be hard pressed to convince me that it is willful that, black people, they just want to live with black people. And
Right.
I think for white people, a lot of it is willful, that they just want to live with white people. But for everybody else, I don't think they've had much of a choice.
Exactly. And that's something that really provokes me, that makes me want to jump into the debate and dialogue when I hear people talk about, they always want to talk about the ills of Chicago. Look at those black people in Chicago. Why don't they better themselves? Why don't they fix South Chicago? Well, it's not that easy. Those people are not there living in that way by choice. Why don't those people just pull themselves up and get out of that neighborhood in South Chicago? The callousness of that statement is astounding. There is no one living there who is enjoying the poverty. You have to look at the systemic, and here comes that word systemic again, the systemic racism in the housing procedures and the housing guidelines up through generations in the city of Chicago that has funneled people into certain neighborhoods and then taken away, pretty much just cut the floor out underneath them to where there is no investment there. There's no jobs. There's no public transportation system. So those people are almost literally stuck there.
Yeah.
They live there and they have no means by which to lift themselves out of that. And then the rest of America stands pointing at them saying, look at you people, you ought to be ashamed of yourselves.
Yeah, just work harder.
Yeah, just work harder. Why don't you do better? If you want better, then do better. It's the callousness and the lack of understanding of history when people say things like that. It's.
Well, I think that's a lot of it. Is nobody has reads up on the history of it or finds out why is it like this.
Yeah, they just see what it is and they blame the people who are in the situation without understanding the history, without understanding the dynamics of that situation and how it came to be.
Yeah.
No, so I don't know. I guess racism is more obvious in the big cities. Maybe, not maybe. I'm sure there's a lot of racism out in rural areas, but again, how will it manifest itself when we're talking about a rural community that's, 99.9% white? Who do they have to hate there? The hatred and the dislike and the social distancing from certain demographics is there in their hearts and minds, but they don't get to display it because there are no people of color who are there for them to be racist against. So just going back to your question about where do I think it's most prevalent? I don't know. It's more visible in the cities, but maybe it's more prevalent in the rural areas. I don't know.
Yeah. Now, I mean, I haven't spent enough time I haven't lived in a rural area as such. So I don't know, but you saw it I saw it in my hometown.
I saw it in my hometown.
Now I see it. I see it. I didn't then.
I can remember there was a boy that I played baseball with, and we actually would carpool. Sometimes my mother would drive us. Sometimes his mother would drive us to baseball practice and baseball games. Football as well. And this boy would sit in the front seat of the car, and he would turn around and he would just look at me with looks of disgust. And he'd be like, you, I'm just going to say it, you fucking nigger.
Good Lord.
Yeah. And his mother would just sit there, not saying a word. And that went on for years. That was maybe from 3rd to 4th or 5th grade where this would happen. And his mother would not say a word.
Lord.
And if my memory serves me correct, now I don't know where she's from, but she had a very distinct Southern accent. I think that in that part of Ohio, there's a lot of immigrants, if you will, people who have moved from the South, West Virginia, and Kentucky. I had a lot of friends who had parents who were quite Southern.
Okay.
So, but she would just sit there, not saying a word. Not once did she ever correct him. Never.
Yeah, I don't know what my mother would have done. My father was from Jackson, my mother was from Southern California. She was from an agricultural in a Imperial Valley in California. And so I know that her dad, he was racist against Mexicans.
Okay. Yeah.
But I think you could compare the two because, the Mexicans in that part of the country, they're doing, the same labor that blacks in the South were doing.
Yeah.
But he was in California. I didn't spend a lot of time with him because of the distance, and that time it was expensive to travel by plane and all of that.
Yeah.
So my mother moved from California, not being, and she did not understand the whole racist mentality.
Right.
She didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think after a while, she realized that she was very much in the minority. And now, had I said something like that to somebody, to one of my friends, I think she'd have popped me in the head real quick. I'm not sure what my dad would have done.
Okay.
But and that's the weird thing it's always been a puzzle to me is that I never heard his parents say or do a racist thing.
No.
In their lives, and I spent a lot of time with them.
Yeah.
The closest thing I ever heard, my grandfather used to go down to. We had and still have a little tree farm, and he would go down to. He had a guy that he would call and pick up and would help him down there doing stuff, and it was a black guy, and we were putting up some new fencing, and I went down there with him, and he had some pliers. Roy, I think was his name, but he had some pliers, and he was trying to tighten up the wire on this fence, and the rubber grip started to kind of bunch up a little bit. And then my grandfather said, he said, "Don't ruin my pliers, boy."
Boy. Yeah.
And then immediately he said, "Roy, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that, boy. I know that was derogatory, and I didn't mean it like that. I apologize." I mean, he said it immediately after.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I know that he just it came out, and it was not. I mean, he had it been me, he would have probably said the same thing.
Right. Understand. Yeah.
So at least I like to think that in my dreams, in my head, I like to think that.
No, but he probably didn't mean it. I mean, I'm sure his apology was sincere in that it came immediately after he said what he said. Yeah.
It absolutely was, and and I think Roy appreciated that sure. And I appreciated it. I thought that was Then I realized that well, he didn't mean that. So I never, and I don't know where my father's sort of racist comments and everything came from. So I think it came from other influences.
I was going to say it's probably the influences of the time.
It could have been the time. It could have been his time at Ole Miss. It could have, because he was there, or mid 50s. So that, and that was, it was a hotbed of segregation. And, James, it wasn't too much longer after that James Meredith became the first black student there.
Yeah. Wow. Imagine being around during those times. Wow.
Yeah. So I don't know what so he went to an all white school.
It was very interesting. My times as a truck driver. Like I said, 18 months after my active duty time in the U.S. Marines, and I went to almost every state in the nation. But I specifically remember driving through, because my grandmother, when she told me to be careful, like it really wasn't anything that I ever thought about before that. And then when she told me to be careful, it's not like it made me worried, but I said, okay, I'm going to be observant. I'm going to see if there is a difference in the people, in how I'm treated, and how people relate with me when I'm in certain states. And there is a difference. I can't put my finger on, a lot of time has gone since then, but I remember and I don't see myself as a paranoid person. I'm not looking for racism, so to speak, but I am very observant. And I remember it was different when I was in Mississippi and other states. But like as if people were almost overly, no, I don't want to say they were careful in how they spoke to me, more reserved.
Right. Yeah.
More reserved,
Yeah,
little less friendly. Now, is that racism or is that, I don't know, but it was different. It was very different.
I suspect that it was probably racism because, normally, you see, and when we're at home and even here, sometimes I'll get very American and I'll say hello to a total stranger on the street. And my kids like, who's that? Yeah, no, I don't know.
Yeah.
Why'd you say hi? Just trying to be friendly. That's all. And that happened, when I take my kids over to the States and we'd visit, we walk around the neighborhood, and I don't know that many people in my mom's neighborhood now. There's been a change of sort of a generational shift, and people have moved out and others have moved in. But you walk around the neighborhood and you say hello.
Yeah.
And so when they see a strange black face, then they are probably more reserved, and then that's sort of inherent in the system, and
I wonder how what their impression was of me, because you see me here on our FaceTime, from the chest up, but I'm a big guy, very muscular. I'm not tall. I'm only 5'8", but I'm quite muscular, power lifter.
Yeah.
And I've always been extremely muscular. I'm always the biggest one in the room. And I wonder how much of a part did that play in these areas that have a lot of racism? Did they feel, I've talked about the fear of the black man that a lot of racists have. It's based on fear, almost a physical fear that manifests itself with black men. And then here I come, this big, thick, strong, muscular specimen of a black man. I wonder what that did to a racist when they then had to deal with me when I'm coming through.
Probably scared them.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine. I think had I met you during that time, I probably would have been a bit scared or intimidated at the very least.
Even though I'm a soft-spoken, outwardly compassionate and non-threatening, there would still be.
I don't know if I started talking to you.
Yeah.
I think it would have subsided pretty quickly, but
the first reaction.
But the first reaction, and I like to think also that during that, had I met the same guy had you been white, I'd have probably been slightly reserved.
I see.
But for me, that might have been more, big muscle dude, what's, I don't want to get on his bad side.
Right.
And
I can understand that. I can understand that.
That's a tough question. But I think it may be a combination of being black and being muscular, where your strength is obvious.
Yeah. In other words, strength and size and all that, and the threat of getting your ass kicked maybe will make a racist be a little bit less racist in the moment.
Maybe, or it might just open up the door enough where you can talk to them and well, I'm not a threat. I'm not a threat to anybody. I'm just here, doing a job.
Well, I can tell you, I had a run up to. I was actually in Canada for a while, and on that trip, I made a stop somewhere way up north, up by the border in Minnesota, up by the Canadian-Minnesotan border, and. I backed the truck into the warehouse and they're unloading and I'm inside just, kind of hanging out, drinking a cup of coffee, and everybody was just kind of staring at me and looking me up and down and stuff. So finally I asked this, they weren't unfriendly, but I could tell they were curious. It was actually kind of humorous at the time. I didn't feel threatened in the slightest bit. So finally I asked this guy, what's up? What are you guys looking at? And this guy says something to the effect, with that Minnesota accent. Yeah. He says, well, we don't see too many of your kind up here, don't you know? And I just had to bust out laughing, and then we opened up. We had a little talk about that. They were simply not used to seeing a black guy way up there.
Yeah.
It was really that simple. So they were curious.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's an example where dialogue, just talk, and you'll see that there really are no differences between people. The guy was just curious.
Yeah. One of my first, and this is slightly embarrassing to tell because it just sort of how close-minded I was at that time. My first experience with this black guy in Norway was, he was. I saw him just what was it around the town center, shopping center. And I saw this black guy, and my first thought was, he's got to be an American.
Okay.
It never occurred to me that the dude could be from Africa, which he was.
Yeah.
So his English he didn't have too good of English, and I didn't have any Norwegian, so we couldn't really talk. But he was a nice fellow, and I tried to start a conversation with him, and then realized, oh man, this guy's not African American, he's African. Shit. Never occurred to me.
Right.
I thought, he's black. He must be American. No.
See,
black people not parts of.
Well, for me, it's the opposite. When I see a black guy here, I automatically assume he's African, just because I know there are a few black Americans here, but when I say few, I mean a few, capital F.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that is interesting. And I have since I've been here now almost 20 years, 18 and a half years, I know that most people are going to assume, they're not going to think that I'm American. And it's very interesting to see how they treat me because they don't think I'm American. Because there is a noticeable change, very often a noticeable change when they do find out that I'm American.
Yeah. You think your experience is being treated differently as a black American versus a black
African, for example.
African.
Although some people think, I don't know if it's because of my skin tone or facial features, a lot of Norwegians think I'm a Pacific Islander. Samoan or something, which I just have to laugh. I don't understand that, but that's what a lot of Norwegians think. It's pretty funny.
Right. Yeah.
But they almost always assume I am African or Pacific Islander or something. And and then I see a change in the way they treat me or relate to me when I tell them I'm an American. And that says something about xenophobia and possibly racism or prejudice. That says a lot right there.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to try to figure out what is behind the Norwegian racism. I mean, because even their constitution, did not allow Jews into the country until when it was late 1970 something. I think.
Yeah. Well, I think the Norwegian society, I think that their customs and their way of life is so strong and well embedded in the people here. I don't see what they have to fear. I don't see why xenophobia is an issue here because Norway is very Norwegian. There's not a lot of immigrants here. They talk about their fear of Muslim influence and whatnot. I don't know the percentage, but there are not a lot of non-Norwegians here. So I don't know what they're afraid of. Don't they see the strength in their society, in their way of living? I don't think they do, because if they did, they would not fear non-Norwegian people coming to this country.
Yeah.
That's my opinion.
I would agree with you on that. I think that's
Lutefisken lefse in every home.
Yeah, no, I'll pass. Thanks.
Thank you. Me too. Hey man, listen. Let's. We've been talking for 2 hours and 5 minutes. It's been a great conversation, but I need to move along and see if I can get that woman of mine to go get some Italian ice cream and a coffee mocha.
Do that.
But I have truly enjoyed this conversation. I do want to thank you, and let's call this day one of our friendship. I need to get you up here. We can watch some football this fall. Absolutely,
I will look forward to it, John. Absolutely, that would be great, and we'll have you down here. I told you I had some on our first conversation about the 2 other couples that we met.
That's right.
We were going to have a fried food evening.
That's right. Yeah.
So we'll when we pin that down, I'm gonna absolutely send you an invite.
I'll be there, but be careful. I've got an appetite. I can eat now.
Oh, that's okay. All right. That's fine. That's fine.
All right, man.
We'll have plenty of it.
Well, let's make it happen. And I just want to say again, thank you for having this conversation with me. It's been enlightening. Thank you for sharing some things that a lot of people aren't willing to share. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for letting me share.
All right. Thanks a lot, George.
Okay.
Bye, everybody.
I'm coming home. Yes, I am. Yes, I'm coming home. I'm coming home. Yes, I am. My Lord, oh my Lord. Lord, I'm coming home.